Now, recently Jon Favreau, the showrunner of The Mandalorian, did an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, and I'm just going to start out this video by reading what he had to say in regards to Star Wars fans. You put something out in the world and then it echoes back at you. You have to listen. It's not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. You have to feel the energy of the audience. But when you come from comedy, and I was doing improv back in Chicago, that's it, you have to read the room. You have to feel the room. You have to be in community with the audience. You have to be part of it. The fact of the matter is, as much as we love working on Star Wars, we love even more making Star Wars for other people. And when other people are excited by it, dig what you're doing, and are appreciative, that's as good as it gets for us. Okay, and now let's compare that to what Rian Johnson, writer and director of Episode 8, said about fans and how he approached making a Star Wars film. And I know these are older clips that most of you have seen elsewhere, but let's watch them again quickly.
But like, when you make edgy, bold decisions like you did in this movie, how worried are you that you might also piss off people that are...
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. Yeah. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie, which
having grown up as a Star Wars fan for myself for my entire life, and having been on the other side of that curtain for the majority of my life, I know firsthand that how passionate Star Wars fans are. I know that every Star Wars fan has a list of stuff they want and don't want from all of these movies, and nothing's going to line up with that. But that's not to poo-poo that. And even hatred from the fans comes from a place of deeply caring about it and of passion. And so I'm never going to dismiss that. And obviously, you don't want people to not like the movie.
I would be worried if everybody across the board was like, yeah, that was a good movie. It's much more exciting to me when you get, a group of people who are like coming up to you and really, really excited about it, and it's going to be something that they're having their DVD collection and watch it over and over. The way that I got into Miller's Crossing, maybe, I don't know. But and then there are other people who walk out literally saying that was the worst movie I've ever seen. Having those two extremes to me is the mark of the type of movie that I want to make. So,
but I also know that if we have, like Mark said, you got to think about your movie first and foremost. And I know that George Lucas, the one thing he never did was to make any decision in any of his movies based on some idea of making anyone but himself happy with the story. And I know that that's, if you second guess every creative decision that you have, that you're led to with some idea of, yes, but is this abstract notion of the fandom going to approve of this, then you're going to make a bad movie. And that's the one thing that nobody wants, I think. So, yeah, I had to, just kind of, I had to kind of tell the story that I believed in, and and then put it out there. That's all you can ever do with any film, I think.
Okay, so obviously these are two completely different mindsets and approaches here between Favreau and Johnson, and one led to the most divisive movie in the whole franchise, while the other led to a streaming series that, so far at least, has been almost universally praised and enjoyed by the fan base. And what I want to do first here is point out the irony, or I guess you could even call it hypocrisy, of what Rian Johnson says here. Because he clearly states that he's a lifelong Star Wars fan, that he grew up with it, and that he believes all Star Wars fans have a checklist of things they want to see and don't want to see in these films, something I don't necessarily agree with, but clearly he does, so let's go with it. Johnson then goes on to say that no Star Wars movie is ever going to align with the wants and desires of the individual fan, that no fan will ever exactly get the movie they want, except in his case. Because again, Rian Johnson is, as he himself said, a Star Wars fan. By his own definition, he must have a list of things he wants and doesn't want to see in a Star Wars film. And yet he also then says here that it's not about the fans, it's only about the fan, I guess, as in himself, that he made the movie exactly how he wanted, that he essentially didn't want to be influenced by outside factors, like other fans, for fear of making a bad movie that people wouldn't like, even though in that other clip he talks about how he'd be worried if everyone liked a movie. Anyway, setting that clip aside, all this of course means that Rian Johnson is a Star Wars fan that got exactly the Star Wars movie he wanted, He got to cross off all the things on his checklist that he wanted to see and didn't want to see. Again, he's rather hypocritical here with what he says. He's in a way saying that since I got to make the movie, I'm the fan who gets his way. And he tries to defend this by basically saying, well, George Lucas made movies for himself, he didn't cater to or worry about the fans either, which is mostly true, though Lucas did reduce the role of Jar Jar Binks in the prequels after the reaction to him in Episode 1. But the thing is, George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars. He created the original trilogy, which essentially created the fan base, meaning, in theory at least, his vision or the stories that he wants to tell and the way he makes these movies should just naturally line up with most fans and what they want. But that of course didn't happen with the prequels. They were rather divisive movies. Why was that the case? Well, partly because many people didn't think they were very well made movies in terms of dialogue or the scripts, not necessarily the story, as well as some of the acting and so on. It was more about failed execution than anything else for a lot of people. But it was also partly because, yes, George Lucas made the movies he wanted, with little or no fan concern or input taken into consideration, though he did at times borrow things from the EU. He also put things like midi-chlorians in there, which a lot of fans absolutely hated. They hated that they seemingly began to quantify the Force, which they felt like was in stark opposition to what they believed to be true about it after the original trilogy. And so, considering the controversy the prequels did indeed cause, it's rather odd that Johnson would cite George Lucas making movies the way he wanted here, when doing that with the prequels was, again, in a sense or to some degree, what created a rift in the fan base then. And him creating Episode 8 for himself without worrying about the fans or their potential input is what split it yet again. And look, I'm not saying it was a bad thing that Lucas made the prequels his way, or that he didn't have every right to do whatever he wanted with them, as Disney now has every right to do whatever they want with Star Wars since they own it. I'm not implying we stifle creativity in favor of always catering to the fans. And as I said, in theory, there shouldn't be much conflict between fans and creators, since fans love what the creator, well, what they created. And oftentimes there is no conflict between them. There have been many science fiction or fantasy series that I have read in my life, long-running ones, where the author keeps building and building upon their world, and it only engages and pleases the fans more with each new book or story they tell. And I do oftentimes wonder what overall fan reaction to the prequels would have been like if they'd been executed a bit better, and if some changes were made, like Jar Jar Binks' initial over-the-top behavior being lessened a bit, or not adding the midi-chlorians, even though the microbiotic realm is the direction Lucas would have taken the Star Wars sequel trilogy into. And no, I'm not saying that's the way the prequels should have gone. I'm not saying fans should get to dictate and control the story. But there is a unique and oftentimes tricky relationship between fans and creators, because, as mentioned before, it's the creator that initially gives the fans something they love, and it generally comes purely from the imagination of the creator, or whatever inspired them. They're not taking fan input from the start, because there are no fans from the start. Which means, at the beginning, a creator is just writing a story for himself and hoping someone will eventually like it and watch it or read it. The tricky part then comes when people do like it, because it's those people who then basically afford the creator the luxury of getting to write more books or make more movies, since those fans are the ones paying for and or funding your work. So if they suddenly, in mass, don't like something you're doing, how should the creator respond? Cater to them so they keep funding your work, or keep telling the story you want? Do you hold true to your artistic freedom at all cost? But the thing is, it's usually not quite that simple, because in a lot of cases, especially with films, there's almost always a third party involved. There's the company that actually owns the IP. And so when we're talking about Star Wars today, whoever is creating these stories is working for someone else. They're working for Lucasfilm, which is owned by Disney, who wants to see Lucasfilm make money for them. Now, it was a whole different ballgame when George Lucas flat out owned the company because it was all his money on the line. But for someone like Rian Johnson to be dismissive of fans is strange, since, let's be real here, he was hired to make a movie that fans would love in order to make money for Lucasfilm and Disney. Which then brings us right back to Jon Favreau and what he said about fans to The Hollywood Reporter, about how what you do echoes back at you, how you have to listen to the fans, how it's a two-way street. And he's so very right. Only I'd say a good franchise is more like a wheel rolling down the highway, where on the outside you have corporate interests, or making money, as well as fan interest, which is to basically enjoy the product. And they're going round and round. If fans are happy, they'll buy the product and make money for the company, and the company will make or fund more products. And at the center of it all are the creators. They're the ones who have to come up with the stories that keep the wheel turning smoothly, that keep the fans happy by giving them stories they want, while also making money for the company, while also being able to inject their own creativity in there. Now you might say in a perfect world we could eliminate the corporate side of things and just make it a back and forth between fans and creators. Though it is interesting to ponder what the prequels would have been if George Lucas was answering to someone, if he had a corporate overlord. Would they have been better, worse, or about the same? Anyway, after reading this quote, and especially after watching the Making of the Mandalorian series on Disney+, it's become abundantly clear that Jon Favreau gets it, whereas Rian Johnson did not. And I'm still amazed that Johnson, with his outlook on things, was hired in the first place and even promised a whole trilogy. I guess at the time, Disney and or Lucasfilm were wrongly under the impression that Star Wars somehow needed to be reinvented or reimagined or reinvigorated for some reason, and that Rian Johnson was the man for the job, when Jon Favreau has proven the only thing that needed to be done to make Star Wars good was to honor what it had always been and to listen to the fans. That was it. That was the secret ingredient that should have been obvious. Because the only checklist most fans have, the only thing they want out of Star Wars, is not an exact list of demands. It doesn't have to be exactly this or that. It just has to be good. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought about the mindset of Rian Johnson versus the mindset of Jon Favreau, and why one seemed to work, and why the other one split the fan base. So whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.